Hello and welcome to, I think, our second book update live stream. We got done. The whole reason why I delayed was to press pause, press the mute button, but there I actually forgot in the end. So, hello and welcome to the live stream for our book update number 2. Donal, how's it going?
Pretty good, Tom. Yep.
Very good.
To talk about it.
Ready to talk about the book that everybody's talking about. So we have a few people in the chat. Let's say hi to the chat. I see Jack from Auxiliary Statements is in there. How's it going, Jack? I meant to go to the Anarchist Book Fair a couple of weeks ago when you were there, and I totally just forgot about it on the weekend. So, you know, that's how I roll. Okay. And to Jerker Sandkvist, in the chat as well. How's it going, Jerker? Okay, so we have what are we going to talk about, Donal?
Well, I guess we better talk about the book, or they'll be disappointed in the chat.
Yeah. Yes. So I don't know what we talked about the last time we had the book, but we've been working away, doing a lot of work. Should we jump into it? Let's jump in. Let's get up. I have a little presentation here that is ridiculously simple, and there's nothing really to it at all, just to help us talk around stuff. So let me just see if I can share my slides. Let's see how this share screen. Let's try it. Share, and then let's go slideshow. Okay, so we've just put together a little bit of a book outline for everybody so they can have maybe a better understanding of what the hell we're talking about. So essentially, the book is going to be broken up into 3 sections. First of all is what we call the foundations. So this is what we think are the kind of core elements of the analysis for the rest of the book. So, so we have a foundation, and then second of all, we have a section where we've titled critique, and this is a general critique of literally every kind of school worth mentioning of the socialist school and the theoretical debates around each of those. And finally, we have what we are going to term for the moment the contribution. So this is building out Sorry, Donal. I think I went dead there for a minute.
Ah, I didn't know if it was you or me. Sorry.
Yeah, no, so it was me. So 1 second here. So where did it cut out for you, Donal? And we'll go from there.
You just started to speak about the foundation, I think.
Okay. So the foundation, do you want to take it this time, Donal, and say what the foundation is?
Okay, sure. So basically, the foundation is just where we lay out 2 pretty two kind of tracts of thought. So the first one is Marx's value theory, analysis of capitalism, and Marx and Engels' ideas about socialism, even though, you know, they weren't very developed, but they had pretty, they had made a good start. Then the second track is on cybernetics theory, and particularly, well, first on sort of Beerian cybernetics and also on the more modern cybernetics as it's applied to modern industry. And that's something we've been working on more recently, adding to the book.
That's basically kind of what we've been working on to a large extent since our last book.
Definitely over the last 3-4 months, yeah.
Yeah. So and then we've got our critique, whereby we critique all of the existing, like both the historical schools of So the historical examples, so Soviet-style central planning, market socialism, and all the arguments that went on in the calculation debate, the theoretical arguments, and anarchism as well. And then also kind of modern schools, so modern kind of central planning, Paracon, and such things. We're going to get to them. And finally is our contribution. And this is where we build out upon Marx and Engels' works. And as kind of extended by the GIC. And we integrate kind of the kind of fundamental findings that we've been kind of discovering through our research and work, and trying to develop the existing stuff there, hopefully to a large extent. So one thing we were like discussing today, we were saying, well, what would we talk about? Well, what will we actually say to everybody? So I suppose kind of an overarching thing that like the book has turned into was that when we first initially kind of started, we were kind of very much inspired by the labor time approach of the GIC, and developing it and kind of teasing out the different various elements in it and kind of bringing it up to date and extending it a bit. But over time, in the research, it seems kind of like the book has broadened into what I was saying to Donal today is like the kind of frame and I kind of feel about it now is it's kind of like a work of nearly like not to sound too kind of pretentious or anything, but like it's kind of like a work of science, as in like all of the kind of things that we will be saying and doing, particularly say in the contribution stuff, is this stuff is actually coming out of like kind of fundamental scientific principles, like cybernetic principles. And we find that when you apply like cybernetic stuff to class stuff, that there are certain necessary features of communism, essentially. And to the extent that the book will be about anything, it will be about talking about what are the kind of necessary fundamental features. And so we're kind of taking like, the name of the GIC, the fundamental principles of communist distribution and production, whatever. But like, we're kind of, showing how that things are kind of more fundamental than what was laid out by the GIC. Donal, talk.
Yeah. Okay. So, so one of the things that we have kind of spoken about from the beginning is this idea that we had kind of intuited from the beginning, that there's a true nature of planning, that planning isn't just rather that socialists had kind of the wrong idea about what planning is, that there was this kind of popularized idea of central planning, that in some sense there's kind of a like plan that is made and formulated in some kind of central authority and then disaggregated and so on, and has to be followed. And really what we had known from the beginning through GIC is that it must imply a different kind of, and through Marx as well, it must imply a different kind of planning, that in a real economy, even in the Soviet type economy, planning didn't work like that. It can't work like that. It has to be a sort of living process of continual refinement and interaction and so on. And so through our study of that, and particularly then in the intervening year, or more than a year since we began this, I've now worked for more than sort of around the same period of time in the field of industrial planning, and so I have been able to see kind of firsthand how the state of the art works in capitalist industry, and that more than confirmed a lot of the stuff we had intuited from the beginning about how planning works. And then we were able to, in some sense, kind of really surprised ourselves with that a lot of the things that we had kind of thought from the start turned out to be more true than we had realized, like about how labor time planning, labor time accounting, how efficiency is understood, how cost accounting is done, the different types of rationalities that are applied within real production processes. And we've been able to have, without saying too much, we've been able to make some really significant findings for the book that have been well worth the extra study, I think.
Yeah. So I think that's, kind of fundamental. Like I was talking to June from GIC on the on Discord there a couple of weeks ago about the TPS episode that came out, and like the way I kind of described the book was that, in essence, we're trying to kind of, integrate value theory and cybernetics together. And that's the journey we've been on. And so like the book, the kind of the scope of the book has become, I think it's increased in scope, but not where we wouldn't have thought it, I don't think, too much. But I think a huge amount of it has actually come from, Donal being a bloody, trained practitioner in cybernetics in industry, essentially, and seeing the impact of things that like we may have read in like beer or stuff like this, what role like requisite variety and stuff like that plays in really complicated production processes, and how they must be applied to communism. Communism must be like basically a viable it must be a viable system. And so so when we look to the foundation part, we've got like kind of 4 big chapters here. Well, some of them bigger than others, but these are the kind of like foundations. So like I think maybe when people buy the book, when it eventually comes out, and they go, oh, Jesus Christ, he's asked me to read 50 pages of bloody value theory at the start. I'm afraid, you have to read the 50 pages of value theory. This is what we're saying. And you're going to have to take a good dollop of cybernetics. Okay. And these 2 pillars that we will lay down at the start of the book in this kind of core part, they will...
He's gone again. Let's see. I assume he's gone again, and it's not me, but it could be me. Again, and it's not
I'm back.
Me. Oh, are you sure? Okay,
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hear you now. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry about this, everybody. I don't know what's going on with my internet. We'll continue again. Keep going. Where did I drop out?
Not sure. Run the tape back. No, I guess it was like, just on. You're talking about the 50 pages people have to read, and then cybernetics people have to have a look at that.
Right. Yeah. So these are kind of foundational elements, along with, of course, Marx's stuff on and Engels on the nature of socialism. And I suppose one way of thinking about the book, Donal, as well, is that like what we need, what I was going to say was that you can read stuff like, you can read Paracon, or you can read Cockshot stuff, or you can read some other things. You could read Half-Earth Socialism. You could read some of these things. But what's missing from all of them is really a functioning political economy, a socialist political economy. And like the nature of the cybernetic nature of the fucking universe means that like, the point is not that we need to have a big N by N matrix solving detailed production plans telling us what to do. The point is that that the nature of the universe is that like these complex organisms self-organize at the point, at various recursions, and that in capitalism this is arranged within a political economy. Capitalism has a political economy through which self-organized people are able to like solve their detailed production plans, through labor and through interaction in their everyday lives, and that we need a socialist political economy that makes a socialism viable. And I think that's probably, another very, very fundamental element of the book.
Yeah. So one kind of way to think about it, I guess, is like, if you think about, kind of different levels of control, control system kind of idea about the economy. And obviously one of the main advantages, one of the key strengths in a way of capitalist economy is that firms do individually reproduce themselves. And because they do, you've got this sort of dynamic of profit and loss where you need to reconstitute yourself. And then that at least gives a sort of baseline for the whole system to work. So yeah, you need something like that. That, like, I think you mentioned before, this Max Weber, was it? He had this objective rationality. Is that what he called it, for like this kind of stuff where
formal rationality.
Formal rationality, yeah, nice. So you have that on one level, and we would argue you absolutely need it, and that's labor time accounting comes in for us. And there are others who argue you don't need it. So we'll be addressing that, and we have already written all of that stuff. And on the other hand, there's this kind of substantive rationality, this kind of idea that there are then other things as well. So take the example of a big capitalist corporation again, that might have hundreds of thousands of employees. And obviously, if some team within some department in that huge organization, they don't reproduce themselves individually, right? The whole thing reproduces itself as a business organization. So the parts of it don't individually. And so they affect different kinds of control within their organization. And it's really interesting then when you get into the theory and practice of how that works, you can see that kind of non-profit and loss, that kind of substantive, different kind of control systems, actually the cutting edge and the most modern research on this and we have a lot of work done on it, is that the way that you achieve that is by creating social relations which are basically sort of leading up to socialist social relations. Those would be the optimal conditions for getting results from those kind of disaggregated levels of the organization. And the reason for that is that if you have this idea of planning as just being sending down commands as to what to do, and then the lower parts just fulfill the commands that they're given, you surrender effectively the self-organization and the independent input and discovery process that should be happening at the lower levels and throughout the organization. So that's why theories have been developed over the years for these capitalist companies that want to create those kind of conditions. And in order to create the right conditions for that to happen, you actually need to bring in things like equality of income. Now, we won't have income or any, like wages or anything like that. But, the point is that you need to have certain social relations at that level, which facilitate things like cooperation, teamwork, and so on. And that turns out to be very important for us in our inquiry later. So,
right, and it's a kind of a very deep kind of a point like that. This Taylorist kind of approach, which is what most of our Fordist approach is, what all of this central planning stuff is based upon, the maximization of maximization of efficiency at like the individual process level, which when you take it as a whole is less efficient. And so what we end up with is this kind of deep point, is that, like, capitalism at the most advanced levels, most productive levels of capitalism, they have realized that alienated labor is a fetter. Right now, I don't know how much Marx goes into alienation being a fetter in particular. I don't think very much. Maybe some Marxologist that's on the show can point it out. But it'd be interesting to see if he does talk about it in those. I've never heard of it, but like, it's a major fetter. Like Toyota and people who are trying to do the TPS, they've come to the realization that is like literally preventing, like that is nearly like the most important thing in terms of modern industry, is to try and get problem solving out of all your employees, and not just your industrial engineers, or as I like to call them, clipboard wankers like Donal.
Yes, you demonetized now. Good enough for you. Yeah.
Damn, there goes my 0.0007 cents. But yeah, so like that is a deep point, and it comes out of like like, obviously, like, as communists, we don't want alienated labor, right? But like, it's not simply that, like, we just don't want it, right? It's actually that it is actually really, really fucking bad for a mode of production to have alienated labor, right? Now, capitalism has less alienated labor than slavery, right? And that was actually one of the big things about capitalism, was like, it actually, the workers weren't as antagonistic towards the mode of production. But again, we're going to see, we're going to show how, like, you have this like complete convergence of, like, what are communist, inverted commas, ideals, what we want, what, not just what we want, like what communism has to be communism, right? But also, like, what productive systems have to be productive, right? And and there's no coming away. There's no coming back from this. Like, there is literally, it's a matter of scientific discovery that the notions of central planning that are hegemonic in the left, the commie kind of interested left, that those centralized planning schemas, or whatever we want to call them, they are basically just absolutely non-viable. They literally cannot be the basis for communism, not simply because
Man, internet connection in wherever he is, somewhere in England, must be really bad. I don't know. But bear with us. Hopefully he'll be back in a moment.
I'm back. Sorry
You're
about
back.
that. Fucking hell. Where did I end up? This is going to be the worst live stream of all time.
What's up with your internet? Or
I have
is
no
there
idea.
different
The
problems?
desk has been moved from one side of the room to the other because I've been stripping wallpaper. And it's like, literally, maybe that 1-2 meters might have made the difference. So basically what this is teaching us is that, Donal, you should do all the talking, and I should just like look cool.
Well, you were talking about some of the critiques of central planning, and alienation. So maybe that's a good time to go on to the critiques part, and we can.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I'll just say one sentence to kind of wrap up what I think might have happened and been lost at the other end. But that it's like that central planning, like, it's a matter of scientific fact that central planning cannot work because it doesn't have the requisite variety to deal with it. And like, well, one thing that's kind of interesting in the book is that we're going to have lots of like interesting kind of like the paradox of push production, or the paradox of central planning, or something like this. So we're going to have lots of like kind of zingers that people can read the book and go, yeah, fuck, that is the argument there, right? And that people can really grasp clear. And anyway, Donal, take the critique section. I'll shut up in case my internet goes.
Yeah, it's a good point. So we're going to try and make the book as accessible as possible, and we've been working on that to try to get our critiques really kind of just down to the clearest possible, most just sharpest as possible, so that it gets across exactly what our critiques are, so that people can also use them and say whether they agree with us or not. They can easily reference them. So development of socialist economic thought, that chapter is basically related to stuff Tom said already, like the calculation debate, and what else is in there? I think some of the earlier stuff, going back maybe to the early social democrats and Engels, and
like, so the development of where the SPD went, Hilferding, like the kind of the origin, the history of the origins of all the central planning stuff, and one thing we discovered, I think I might have said in some podcast episodes previously, is like, that Marx and Engels never, ever, ever, not once in 29,000 pages ever mentioned the term central planning. It doesn't appear. Okay, it's not a concept of Marx and Engels, and the way they talked about planning was linked to kind of cartelization, mainly, and then also kind of like planned regional type development. So like this idea that Marx and Engels are central planners, which when I went to do the research, I assumed that was the case, that they actually were central planners. And then I was reading some books, and every Marx quote never, ever mentioned it. I was like, that is weird. So I went and checked all 50 volumes of the Marx Engels collective, all 29,000 pages. And I was right. There's not even one quote that can even reasonably be, once you understand what they're talking about, that even you can actually think they're talking about a central plan as commonly accepted.
Yeah, that's true, I think. Not as commonly accepted, for sure. And also the kind of way that they talk about socialism or communism is in terms of like associated labor, association. And that's also how the socialists at the time, like, to take like Proudhon, for example, not a communist, but an anarchist, kind of mutualist. Like he also had that same kind of idea of, he critiqued an economy based on association and said it wouldn't work. So that was the idea that was there at the time. The idea that was being discussed wasn't in terms of like the state would run the economy through state-owned enterprises or something. It was an association of workers' associations, like that was, and that's, so we make that kind of very clear, go through the history. Okay, so on Soviet central planning, this brings a lot of the critiques we had already kind of introduced and concretizes them. And so we're talking about how in the Soviet type economy, you had things like this problem of push production. So push production is this kind of production according to the requirements of a planning agency. And that leads to all kinds of problems. And we go in and talk about that and why modern industry today wouldn't be compatible with that. So the kind of hegemonic ideas on the planning socialist left today, if you were to tell them to someone who's involved at in industrial planning today, they would dismiss them straight away. They'd laugh at the idea because it's not. It's a vastly inferior idea just on a technical basis. It wouldn't work. It would mean going back 50 years, technically, and so we'll go through and explain all the reasons for that. There's many different reasons.
When we give like a kind of a novel, we think we haven't come across any critique like it before of the Soviet central planning, but we give a cybernetic critique of it. So there's kind of like two elements, like the book. In this chapter, there's like a value theoretic analysis of the Soviet Union, and then there is a Soviet planning, and then there is the cybernetic analysis. And we give basically, a very detailed cybernetic critique of it, and we model the Soviet mode of production, and we show exactly where in the, if we were to model it like a VSM, you can show what things were dysfunctional, and it's all. I think it's incredibly enlightening, but also I don't think it's ever been done before.
Yeah, not that we've found. So hopefully that'll be pretty interesting and illuminating for people to kind of clarify what exactly the problems were, both like on that cybernetics and from a Marxist perspective. Okay, what else do we have? Market socialism, that has a special focus on Yugoslavia, I should mention. And so Yugoslav model is also something that's kind of still discussed on the left, so we wanted to include it and to see what the problems are, again, both kind of from a communist point of view and from a cybernetic point of view. And we again go through and show, okay, at a cybernetic representation, what were the problems, what aspects are missing that would be in a viable system, or missing or deficient, and why that is the case. So what we always try to do with these chapters is to show things that are necessarily the case, that are kind of like, again, a scientific basis to the extent that you can say that, where we want to show, like, because it's organized in this way, it necessarily follows that this problem will be there, and therefore it would never be a long-term, let's say, something that could supplant the capitalist system, because we already have shown in earlier chapters that the capitalist system has better, has certain, we're not saying it's viable, long-term viable. I mean, in terms of climate change and everything else, we're just saying it has certain viability characteristics that are missing in the Soviet type market socialism and so on. Do you want to say anything on market socialism?
No, that's good. So there's always, for us doing these chapters, like this divide and conquer. So we've been kind of picking chapters ourselves to write, and then we kind of co-edit and critique each other's stuff along the way. So a few of these ones. So the first two I've done: market socialism and anarchism. Donal will be doing, and communization, and I'll do modern central planning and Paracon. You want to say something about the anarchism one as well?
Yeah, the anarchism one was one of the most interesting ones to write for me, because I had to do quite a bit of research on anarchism, topic I wasn't that well up on, and a lot of anarchists, any anarchist listening might not like this, but one of the more interesting people for me in that tradition, trying to read as much of the literature as I could, was Proudhon, actually. And I thought his original critique, one of his original critiques of association of a sort of communist kind of economy, was a very good cybernetic point. Like, his idea was to say that because you don't have this profit and loss system, you're never you don't have what we would say in a VSM representation cybernetic system. You don't have a lower management function. You don't have that reactive management that would normally compel producers to change and become more efficient and innovate and everything. So you don't have that with association or with communist production. And that's a really strong critique. And so we obviously answer that, and we in part 3 of the book, and speak about how actually cybernetic control is the solution that Proudhon didn't know about, or there weren't developed theories of. But it is this kind of, again, substantive rationality. Like, you do need something in terms of
formal rationality.
Yeah, you do need something in terms of a cost accounting system, something that you can objectively compare and plan and continually regulate. So that's with the lower management aspect of the VSM. You want to be able to continually always reevaluate, always be held to standards in such a way that you are compelled to innovate. And in particular with things like pulp production, you're compelled to produce to society's needs. We'll get into all that, what all that is about. So yeah, we have answers to these critiques, but I think the anarchism one is actually a pretty cool chapter, because it presents some of the strongest critiques against associated production. Although a lot of the later anarchists were communists, so we'd have different arguments with them.
Right. So there's like this anarcho-communist stuff like Malatesta, and Kropotkin that you critique, and syndicalism, the Spanish, the CNT, etc., etc. So modern central planning then, in essence, would be a kind of from our point of view, we see like cockshots towards new socialism as probably the foundational text in that modern.
For sure.
Yeah, so we will do a detailed an analysis of it, of the foundational elements of it. That's what we will say. A detailed critique of the foundational elements of it, and then tie it to kind of as well to the more broader kind of modern central planning approach, which, even for people that could be consider themselves quite politically different than Cockshot, that at essence a lot of the foundational elements of their proposals actually share these same foundations. So that's what that chapter is going to be about. It's a fun chapter. I'm going to write that. I get to write some zingers. It should be fun. And then Paracon as well. We've been like, there's another Irish dude, Ferdia, that we've been doing a lot of I don't know what we call it, lots of talking and stuff with. And he runs the after, what is it called now?
After the Oligarchy.
Yeah, is it changed the name? Is it Bright Age Beyond or something? He's always changing the names or something. It was called After the Oligarchy, and he hasn't been posting too much on YouTube since, but we've been doing a lot of stuff with him, and he's been writing a book with Paracon. We've actually been involved in setting up this planning, this in-depth, I don't know if anybody's heard about it, the international, what does it stand for? Democratic
Network for, Democratic Economic.
International Network for Democratic Economic Planning. With Ferdia has been a real, we've been trying to do a little bit, but nothing like Ferdia and some of the other people who've been really central in getting it going. But Ferdia is writing a book with a co-author with, I think he's Swedish, a guy called Anders. Forget his second name now. Is it Anders? It's not Anders Axelsson, is it?
No, it's. I'm afraid to butcher his surname. I don't want to say, but Sandstrom or something.
Sandstrom, okay, yeah, Anders. But
maybe you're wrong. I'm sorry if it is. Yeah.
So I basically done all the research for the Paracon stuff. So, but I will be probably getting some helpful critique from Ferdia for that. So that'll be interesting. Paracon is such a weird beast. It's such a weird kind of central planning anarchist hybrid, which is kind of well-meaning, a kind of I think it's an important kind of it's nearly more a negative proof of why central planning, even in a decentralized form, cannot work. When I say central planning, we mean this kind of detailed production plan. Okay. We won't go too into it, but it'll be interesting. It'll be an interesting one. It's an interesting one to critique. Finally, Donal, did you want to say something about communization theory?
So again, it was an interesting one to write. It's a kind of unusual school, I would say, of thought, in that, like, we would be very critical of it. There's no doubt about that. And it's kind of difficult to we always want to be fair. So we want to, in all of these chapters, we want to present the absolute strongest position, totally like exactly as the authors in this case, or activists in other cases where it was, or states or whatever, intended it to be read, and then we want to critique on that basis. We don't want to. It's a waste of time for us to try and misrepresent people, because people will just immediately call that out. So with the communization theory one, it's interesting to look at the history. Basically, it originated in like the 1960s, and it's kind of strong, like kind of Bordigist influences, and also Neurath and in-kind planning, no unit of account, and and kind of some of the anarchist tradition in the sense of like anarcho-communist in the sense of no type of connection between labor performed and consumption, and so it's an interesting kind of mixture. But ultimately, our critique of it is pretty harsh, I would say, and people will just have to see what they make of that. But I think it's totally fair, harsh but fair, is what I would say.
Yeah, I would think that all of the critiques in this critique session are harsh but fair. I think because they're all critiqued on kind of such fundamental levels that it's hard to come out of them the far side from us doing the research and consider them like kind of serious. Some of these endeavors, some of the chapters, some of these schools are we find are like definitely more serious than others, in like as in they actually think about the impacts, the second order effects of certain kind of choices they make about their foundations of their economy or something. And some of them literally do not, and some of them are kind of honestly kind of kind of ridiculous when you put any kind of a serious analysis into them. So, and that's just the way the world, so we're going to come out hopefully like so the book is setting out foundations and then setting out critiques, and then like by the end of when we come out of the critiques, we'll have like a really, hopefully the reader will really understand like, oh, it can't be like this, and it can't be like that, and it can't be like this for this reason, and it can't be like that. That there has to be certain things, right? And essentially, when we come out of the critique and we come out onto the next section, which is called contribution, is basically it's like what's left, like what's left over, right? When you take all these critiques and these kind of foundational scientific principles into account. And this is like a kind of so the contribution stuff we have, if we were to look at all of the other chapters, so the first these 11 chapters, they have all been written. Some of them have been 10 of the 11 have been written to and some of them are in the process of being edited and improved at the moment. So we have maybe 7 or 8 of the 11 have got to a very final kind of a point, and there's 3 or 4 that are in the mix still, but they're essentially all written. When we come to the contribution section, the chapters are not written yet. We have lots of writing, right? We have lots of research done and we know what we're going to say, but the chapters as in, okay, blah, 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 let's start. These are yet to be written. So our plan is to finish by the end of this year, to have finished all to a high standard, all of section, so the foundations, which is 95% done. The critique, which is about 80% done. They'll be finished hopefully by the end of December. And then next spring, we want to batch into these. These are tentative chapter titles that we have come up with. We thought previously there would be like 9 chapters in these, and most of them have kind of fallen apart and just got incorporated into other chapters as time went on. But this is kind of what we're seeing, and so this is the end game. This is like when you take all of the stuff that we had from value theory, and we take all of what we've learned about cybernetics, and all that we've learned about modern production systems, and all we've learned about the failures of the different existing socialisms, and all of the critiques of like bourgeois economists, some of which were completely spot on in the calculation debate, and all of the kind of attempts since at new kind of formulations of how socialism could be. When we come through all of that, this is what we're left with. And I think these kind of 5 kind of elements probably kind of capture most of it. Do you want to have a go at what regulation might be then, Donal?
Yeah, it's kind of, this is similar to the stuff I have been speaking about before, but it's kind of what we're talking about now is formalizing, okay, these are how we've spoken about how modern industry affects self-regulation, both in in both of those terms, both in the kind of hard case of cost accounting, although they use money, but it's a monetary expression of value. They kind of track through the production process. In socialism, communism, there is no money economy. There's no need to track it through the production process for the purpose of later exchange. So it's as if there is no change of ownership. So the regulation in a communist economy is like going from one production line to the next within a factory. There's no double entry bookkeeping. There's no changes of ownership. And with the labor that's being carried out, labor is contribution. It's the labor token of Marx is a receipt for participation. It's not a wage. There's no change of ownership. You're just getting back later in a different form the labor that you've contributed. It's the purchasing power was created by your contribution to social labor. So how does regulation work in all of that? Basically through these kind of basically through the various kind of systems that are used in modern industry, because they are cybernetically valid systems. And yeah, we'll get into explaining all of them. But maybe I've left something out, Tom. Don't know. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was thinking of so we've come to the conclusion that we have a kind of analog of the law of value, which we are going to give the name of the law of association, and about communal reproduction. And
yeah, so that's at a higher level of recursion, kind of if the economy is the system in focus, then rather than a production unit or industry or whatever, then yeah, this idea of communal reproduction. So do you want to talk, or I can talk about it?
You keep talking.
Yeah. So of course in capitalism you have the idea of individual production units reproducing themselves through profit and loss, and so on, and they do the cost accounting. And in the communist economy, basically there is no concept of, well, I don't want to go too deeply into the thing, but essentially the production process as a whole does reproduce itself. It's not dependent on whether something is profitable or not. The costs of reproduction are absorbed into the price of the products, and the production system does, as a matter of fact, reproduce itself. Just the costs are absorbed into prices, and then because it does, then that sets the basis of regulation. So in other words, regulation is affected on the system as a communally reproducing system. So no one goes bankrupt. The system doesn't work like that. It works on the basis of reproduction regardless of individual productivities, and then internally it's regulated. That's the best way I can put it, I guess.
Yeah, and it's very this is one of the brilliant things. So in this contribution element, we'll be introducing the kind of real insights of the GIC. And one of the amazing things of the GIC was that if you look at their political economy, right, there's no profit in their political economic equations, right? There's no profit, there's no surplus value. That you can see the social relations in the economic calculations, right? And if we go back to to the critique level, if we look at our analysis of, say, Soviet central planning, they had profits, wages, interest, money, you name it, all of the surplus value, all of the things that you associate with capitalism are in there. Even in anarchism, in market socialism, obviously, you've got competing firms and profits and losses, etc., etc. You've got individual reproduction. The firms reproduce their own selves; they compete in the market. Like in anarchism, Proudhon was like that. Even like syndicalism, where they had individual firms with surpluses that would lend their surplus to other firms, but there was still more profitable firms and weaker firms, and there was wages. There wasn't just a recognition of labor. So modern central planning, Cockshot has got differential wages, immediately throws out communal social relations, like on page 9 of the book or whatever, put them in the bin. Paracon, in fairness, Paracon kind of is agnostic whether people should be paid different wages and stuff. It's a weird one, though. It's kind of some kind of weird communal reproduction. And communization theory basically has no political economy whatsoever. So it's interesting that the GIC, like they got it so right, okay? And it's these forms that we have, like there is no equivalent in this section here, and this is built upon like the insights of GIC and stuff Marx and Engels wrote. Like there's none of these capitalist categories in our economic theory. They just don't exist. There's no profits, there's no surplus, there's no individual reproduction, there is no falling rate of profit, right? There are different dynamics. And these all come out of this foundational thing what we're going to call the law of association.
Right, exactly. And
what he said.
Yeah, what he said. But so it's important to, just to distinguish those things as well. So you have this idea of communal reproduction, Thomas spoken about there and explained, and you have this kind of, within that, then there has to be regulation. Obviously, people can't just, anything isn't social labor. Anything doesn't just count. Society has to have these cybernetically valid mechanisms of determining these things. And these are always the criticisms of socialism, to say you can't have that. There wouldn't be any equivalent for that in a socialist economy. What we show is, yes, there absolutely could be. And it's just based on exactly how things are already done within modern industry. So
that's like, it's something that is really mad, because Donal has been working for the last maybe year in like industry, doing like a industrial process engineer or whatever it is. What's your actual name? What's your title, Donal?
Oh, well, kind of technically smart and digital leader in this big factory. It's like a process control. Yeah.
Right. But it's like, what's amazed Donal is like, we've been doing the GI, writing the book and doing all this reading and labor time planning and accounting and, cybernetics and stuff. And then when Donal, like the first few months he was in there, he was like, oh my God, they do this exactly like what we're saying. It's like, they're actually planning in labor time everywhere, all over the place here. And they even have like measures for complex and simple labor, and everything is just exactly like, what Marx would say capitalism would be, but also like, it's kind of this like, I don't know what I'm going to say, but it was just like, it was just so eye-opening, and it's so confirming the insights that we had kind of been, working on, that like when you see like cybernetics being applied in the actual real world in businesses, that it does so in a way that is incredibly copacetic with what they would be in a communist society.
Yeah, even things like how they, like, this is just one example that just came to my mind there, how they deal with the problem of heterogeneous types of labor. Lots of different types of labor within the factory, and just there's hundreds of different production stations, right? And so and because they have this pull production system where there's different amounts of demand being placed on the different ones all the time, there might be none at all one day, and the production zone is just, nothing happens there. On another day, it might be running 3 shifts, 24 hours. Just depends on what the situation is like. Now there are mechanisms to try to reduce that variability, but you still have some variability. And so the way that they handle that is by just the production workers, and they have their own teams and so on. They say, okay, well, just register on whatever production lines, organize amongst yourselves, whatever production lines are needed for the stuff. That's what you do. And so you have this requirement that just emerges out of that system and its complexity. You couldn't do it any other way. It's too complex. The change, the variability. You say, okay, everybody needs to be cross-trained, and it's in the interest of the workers themselves to cross-train. If you're cross-trained, then you can work on lots of different production activities, depending on what the need comes up. And so, so like you have these kind of dynamics that come out of it, which are, I think, really interesting from our point of view. That like, it occurs to me that a socialist economy would be one that's much more highly educated than a capitalist economy, because you have in a system where people are not being, there's no labor market, there's no differentiation of different kinds of someone should be paid more for this kind of work than that kind of work. That would introduce all kinds of contradictory social relations that would make everyone rush to only do one kind of work, and the factory would break down. So you need to have an equal basis, which you have at that team level. And then I'm not saying that's in every factory in the world or anything. I'm just saying that's like part of the standard way that these things are done with teams, with work teams these days. And you have, so you have this kind of relationship to the production process where people can sign themselves on as they need to, register on these production lines, do that work that comes up, and with all different kinds of skills that are needed. And so the function of that kind of lower management that regulates all this then becomes to provide education and training for that purpose. So this is another kind of regulation where you're like, I just want to speak a little bit more on this because it's interesting. Like if so, even in the case of like where, so our factory here is like in the, basically kind of in the countryside almost. It's like in a relatively small town, although it's a huge factory. And so there's obviously the problem in a kind of small town of maintaining labor. People want to go and work in a bigger city maybe, or something like that. It's inconvenient to live in a small town. And so how did they deal with that? Well, they have a system, and for us it's called the versatility system. Other factories have different kinds of systems, but the way it works is it looks at these kind of the levels of training, the number of people that are available by department and in the factory as a whole to work on all the different production zones, production stations. And a surplus has to exist of a certain amount at all times, and it's algorithmically worked out where, you know, if there's not enough people who do a certain amount of thing, you can say the turnover rate is people don't like doing this kind of work. You know, there's a high turnover rate, people leave or whatever, and people just want to do other kinds of work. Then you train more people into that, so it balances. And so there's a constant sort of rebalancing and so the cybernetic mechanisms in order to account for these kind of problems that would normally exist. If you had a labor market, it would just be that certain things just wouldn't be done, you know, for example, or they would be done, but for wages which are very high or something.
Right. And it's like something that we see in like some of the branches of that we've critiqued, the ones that are kind of more developed and kind of serious. An awful lot of them actually, the first thing they think of, the problem of is how do we get people to do what they don't want to do, and then they throw communism out the window and say we'll give them higher wages and then we'll have class society, right? And the thing is that when you learn from like actual modern industry, like say where Donal is, it's like there's machines that are crappy to work on and machines that are better. But like that doesn't mean that if they don't actually manage to fulfill these tasks, that's in a kind of an antagonistic scenario, like a capitalist firm, right? But like, you know, these antagonisms will be different in communism, and like the, you know, because the workers are in charge and they're in charge of what the means of production are and what should we throw our accumulation towards, say, for example, it will change the nature of the work as well. But like both the social relations will be changed, but also the actual physical change, the work will change as well, to kind of ameliorate from that problem, you know, over time.
Yeah, so if you imagine a situation where these things are organized again by the workers themselves, and we're in teams and so on, and in groups of teams, and it becomes an immediately attractive idea to say, well, we all have to do a certain amount of this work that nobody wants to do. So our first priority should be to get rid of those kind of worst aspects of the job because nobody wants to do them. So if we can automate that, if we can do whatever, that's generally not at all the priority of the business organization, because they can always, hire, whatever, people who are desperate or something and are willing to do those jobs that nobody wants to do. But again, they've found kind of through trial and error and over long periods of time in these more, let's say, forward-looking capitalist corporations, they say, well, if you want people to kind of work in as really contribute teamwork, do mental labor, not only rote physical tasks, and actually improve the factory and production process as such, you have to actually create a different kind of environment. You can't just pay people high wages and low wages and try to fiddle things that way, because then none of that team stuff happens. It doesn't. People just are pitted against each other. And so, yeah, there's all those lessons.
So organization, I think, is probably like, we would talk in terms of like having kind of viable recursion, like the society to be built along, kind of, nested recursions that are, cybernetically valid recursions. And also, and that's at all scales, but also, there's kind of two elements to kind of society when you break it down. There's kind of like, there's our individual consumption element, and then there's our communal consumption element, right? There's production, and then there's like two different types of kind of consumption. There's like me buying my cool cord dungarees here, or like me and Donal building a playground in our local area. Okay, they're kind of two separate types. And so one part of this organization would be talking about like this, what we call the commune, which deals with kind of collective decisions, and how that as well must mirror the kind of the VSM nested recursions, much the same way as in production is organized. We have essentially two kind of Christmas trees or of structures, nested structures, one for production itself, and then another for kind of like collective consumption itself. So that's the general ideas behind organization. Is there anything else kind of interesting around there, or that I've missed out, Donal?
No, just to emphasize that I think in the past, probably socialists have come at this question from two different points of view, neither of which we find very satisfactory. One is this kind of whatever idea of that, well, if you really want things to work, it has to be all organized by some kind of central authority. They should really, that kind of from the Taylorist idea that any kind of modern, like at that time, let's say 100 years ago, modern idea of organization should be a sort of small number of people giving directives and then everyone else carrying them through in some way. And then the second idea, the commune form, which was very popular in opposition to that, we would say, yeah, but it's not cybernetically viable as it's been traditionally understood, where you have this kind of, the idea of delegation, yes, but not of cybernetic regulation. So that's why we want to spend some time on it here, to just say it's equally applicable here as in industry. Yeah.
Right. Like this is like basically, the person who got this correct was like beer, and CyberSyn, but beer also had no political economy, so CyberSyn would have been interesting, but it would have had its own failures. As a political economy wise, it would have been a type of market socialism, more than likely the same kind of. It would have had the same essential problems as market socialism, but maybe more cybernetically planned than a capitalist system, right? That's more cybernetically structured perhaps than capitalism. Planning. So here's where we get to so the basic whole book, like there's so many kind of core themes, but one of them is that like there's a complete reappraisal about what socialist planning needs to be, and what it's not so much what it needs to be, it's what it can be and what it cannot be. And here we will lay out, like in a positive fashion, not just the critique of what it is and how it is something that can be done at all levels of recursion simply, and is facilitated essentially largely by the open system of information that we would call the general ledger, how everything is on there to plan. And it's just essentially not that different to how like planning would occur in capitalism at different orders of recursion, but within a firm, how would they plan production going forward? In a council, how would they plan provision of schools, and so on up to the levels to the nation state and above. It's got nothing to do with central planning. It's commonly understood. These detailed production plans, as Cockshott would call them, like that, there is no place in socialism for that. And here we lay out, in detail what are the conclusions from all the critique and all the analysis. But it should be incredibly like thing is, people think of it as hard. Like it should be so easy. Like if you think about it, like if Europe had a commie revolution in the morning and we wanted to build really good I don't know, solar infrastructure or high-speed rail, and you had to plan it. That because all production is on the general relativity, on the general ledger, you would see, like, you could literally just have a tool like a Google Maps equivalent, something very easy that could interrogate it, and you could see what is the steel production in the European Union, what and how much steel do we estimate would be in this building these trains. Say we get it's 100,000 tons of steel per year to do it, and you could see, do we have the capacity for that? Oh no, we don't. We need to expand capacity. Okay, we need to get onto the steel manufacturers, tell them we're going to put this massive order in, you boys need to expand, blah 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 blah. Just like, it's really, really simple. It's something that any people can do, and it's not something that is where there's a coterie of these special guys in a Gosplan office with large heads who are able to do it, but something that is available for all. And in planning, when it comes down to it, in an awful lot, is about management of capacity and understanding of capacities.
Yeah, and I would say here pull production comes back in. So we haven't really spoken about it in detail, but it's basically, very, very briefly, the idea that production happens in response to the current level of demand, and therefore that each step in the supply chain is effectively producing for use, rather than trying to produce a lot of inventory, which is then they're going to try to offload or something like that. So we'll get into what the difference are between push and pull production more, and make it very clear why pull production is what is needed in the socialist economy. But this comes into planning. So again, if you're talking about capacity management, yes, you'll be able to see through the general ledger situation the current capacity situation, but what will actually where all this data will actually come from is the actual act of producing and of ordering for production. So all of this is a self-organized process. Planning is basically a self-organized process in the sense that everything that's needed for it is provided by the act of production itself. And that is basically, again, the case in the more modern medium to high technology supply chains that exist today. That is how planning is done. It's not that's how supply chain management is done. It's not a question of some higher authority needing to oversee the supply chain and tell everyone what they should be producing. There's no need for that, and that wouldn't be efficient.
Right. It just self-organizes itself in response to algorithmic signals, demand signals.
Yeah, it's an information system as well as a production system.
Right. Then we got a section on what we call accumulation. So this is about, how much stuff do we put aside so that we can expand the economy or change, invest in the economy? Do we want to, plant, 20 billion trees every year? How much that will cost? How do we go about provisioning it? So there's like stuff in here, political economy, stuff around savings and how this kind of dynamic accumulation, how society kind of chooses its own accumulation rate, like kind of in a disaggregated fashion, and how it can also do it in a kind of a what would you say, a conscious fashion too. So it's interesting. And then finally we have rent, communist rent, which is a really critical part. And rent here is a way through which we can deal with basically the problems that people have with labor time planning, which are kind of valid, which is that labor doesn't take account of everything. Okay, like labor, doesn't take account in that the fact that we're like killing the ozone layer, or we're producing loads of CO2. And so we have like labor time is like the kind of major regulator of the whole system. It's the thing that you regulate and you manage for. But there are times in society where like you shouldn't be regulating purely based on labor time, right? You should also be regulating with respect to CO2 or methane emissions. Okay, and with the rent is a way in which you can introduce these kind of like what would we call like kind of a multi-factor kind of element into the regulation of the economy in such a way that the kind of simple way is by charging a rent. So say, for example, it was production of CO2. And if we think about how the European Union tries to do it with carbon credits, okay, so what happens? They say the price of producing a ton of carbon, you have to buy a credit for that. And so they're basically trying to put a price on carbon. And what they do is they're trying to make firms that produce in lots of carbon, like steel industry or the cement industry or whatever, they want to make it really expensive for them so that both people won't buy as much from them and it'll reduce, but also that they will try and self-organize to reduce their carbon, whatever their process is. Maybe they can do some better way that they could store the carbon, or they could use a different chemical or whatever it is. Now, in the European Union, when they try it, it's a total failure. And the reason why it's a total failure is because the companies that so the European, like the science nerds working in Europe, they give recommended. They say, well, if we want to cut carbon by 20% or something, we should set the carbon credit price at like $100 a ton or something like this. But what actually happens in Europe is like that, there's politics. You have like Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz and some other big companies, whatever. They say, you can't be doing that. That'll kill us. And say, can you just set it at $30 a barrel or 30 euros a ton, right? And what that means is that the class relations are coming in and they're preventing, say, a thing like a carbon credit from actually working. Nothing intrinsically wrong with the carbon credit. It's that you can't actually implement it because it's a capitalist society. And in essence, what the rents here is something similar for communism, where you basically, the society would set the carbon credit price, and the economy then would solve it. So you might have a limit for the amount of CO2 production in the entire economy, and then you let the economy react and self-organize such that it's not such that it only uses that amount that we lay down. So you can put physical limits in there, and prices will adjust. And these are non-labor time prices. There'll be a labor time component, and there can be other regulators in there. But the non-labor regulators, will probably change over time, as you decarbonize and stuff like that. But there will always be labor as a regulator. Donal.
Yeah, and just to emphasize, because people can get all kinds of ideas, and I think misconceptions about saying, well, if it's not purely if this glass cup beside me here is not purely a labor time when I go to buy it in the shop, surely then it's somehow not a labor time economy anymore. This isn't really a labor token. It's some kind of money. It's some kind of there must be something suspect going on here. And actually, no. One of the points we really want to make is that it's absolutely valid to introduce that kind of scarcity rent into the thing, which goes back to the communal share of consumption. It kind of individuals pay more for a thing that has rent on it, so that the society in general has less to pay for communal expenses. But the reason it's not money or anything like money is because, again, from the Marxist perspective, money is the function of money for a capitalist society is to realize the exploitation that happens in the hidden abode of production, right, in the workplace. And we're very, very careful to always point out nothing like that is happening here in terms of changing of any kind of prices on that basis. So, I think you're muted, Tom, or maybe just the internet's back.
Yeah, no, it's muted. Sorry. So we had a comment in the chat there. We should go through. If people have questions now, start throwing them in the chat, because we're basically at the end of like what we're going to talk about. So Jerker said in the comments, "Are we introducing the dreaded price controls now?" So like, good question. But these wouldn't be like, the thing is, these aren't price controls. These are like, so what you would say is like society itself will determine, say, for example, how much CO2 should we pump into the atmosphere. Say it says it should be 1 billion tons a year. Okay. And we say, okay, so if you are producing, basically you would put a limit on the amount of CO2 that can be produced. And if goods that are producing lots of CO2 have CO2 embodied in them, they will go up in price such that that in total you only end up using 1 billion tons of CO2 each year. And if the price needs to go up higher, it goes up higher, and it floats down and around. But it's not like price controls are being introduced, as in there's not like the government saying we're introducing this price control. It's the people themselves. Look, if the people want the planet to burn to death, right? You know, it's a communist society. We believe in people's rationality. Right, the only people that can set it, there's not a clique of like fucking scientific know-alls who can tell everybody what to do. At base, it's a communist society. The society itself has to determine what it's going to do and the levels of what it deems as good for itself. There is no other, right? That's the thing. There is no other, and I'm a firm believer in like that. If we did not have bourgeois media control, we had communist media and communist social relations, that we would not have any problem in setting a CO2 limit at the right level, especially when people are being looked after in society and you're not going destitute. So it would not a control in the sense of, as say, it might have been in the Soviet Union.
I was going to say there's a distinction between rent and price controls. Like, so yeah, do you want to go on? Sorry.
Yeah, no, yeah. So it's a good point. So like the rent, let's think about it from the point of view of the society as a whole with the CO2 one. The extra money that people are paying for goods that contain CO2 goes into the coffers to reduce the amount that people have to spend of their personal income on communal stuff. So like that CO2 stuff would subsidize like education, healthcare, and everything else. So the people who aren't spending it, it's in their interest for it to be set at the right level, because it means less money from their pocket, or more personal consumption. Let's put it in that sense. Is that what you're going to say, Donal?
Yeah, basically, and like historically, the role of price controls has been obviously a kind of populist governmental idea of, well, we'll artificially lower the price below really the reproduction cost of the product, and then you've got shortages, obviously, and by messing with the price by adding to prices, you can make black markets because you made something artificially expensive and so on. So like, yeah, we're totally aware of all that. That's I think, as Tom said, it's sort of a self-directed rent. So to the extent that society wants to pursue that in terms of social aims, we think that's totally valid. Society should be able to do it. To the extent that it does cause dysfunction, for example, the price of something goes up to an extent that there causes a black market because the goods can be got from somewhere else or something like that, then, like, let's say that the socialist society doesn't exist everywhere, it only exists in one place, and then people can get goods, maybe they want to get goods from elsewhere because of the rent. Well, society can decide to lower the rent again or whatever, take whatever kind of decision they want. But the point is, it's just what we're saying is it's a tool. It's something that would probably be indispensable because you have to account for non-labor
inputs.
Yeah.
Like it literally could be, you want to protect a certain species, and what does that mean? Like, there's kind of, all manner of different things. Basically, it's what allows it to be kind of a multi-factor unit of account when necessary. Like labor will probably always be like the largest proportion of it, and maybe there'll be some froth on the top. Is the way to kind of think of it. But that's kind of no different than capitalism, because capitalism, charges scarcity rents and certain types of things. So it's not always pure just labor in capitalism either, right? I think that's probably valid, but that the prices of these things are the kind of the rents are just are distributed on private basis as opposed to on a public communal basis. Another question here. If anybody else has anyone's, put them in the chat there. Mason Kerr asks, hello, Mason. Will early systems theoretic work of Alexander Bogdanov appear in the book? Donal?
We hadn't planned to. There's obviously a limited amount of material we can include in the book, and we've already got a pretty substantial book, much more so than we had probably intended at the beginning, because we have brought in a lot of cybernetics stuff. So I would say provisionally the answer is probably no, because we don't think it would be valuable, but just because we think the immediate points that we need to cover, we've covered them based on the material that we have.
And there's a certain sense in which you want to be dealing with state of the art in these things,
Yeah, and people could say, oh, well, then what about Stafford Beer? No, but for us, it establishes the groundwork that we need to later establish the state of the art points.
Right.
From industry.
Yeah.
So I hope that's an okay answer. Maybe you could give more detail on something you think is really important, and we can look at it.
Next one, John Watson. John, thanks for all your donations for the book. Much appreciated. Only one book I know of. He's saying about market socialism. Have you guys looked at Silvio Giselle? I don't think we have looked at Silvio. Have we?
No, we haven't. So that's something for us to look into.
Oh, the Natural Economic Order is. Maybe this is an old dude. Is it? 1916. So this is okay. I'm just looking at it here. Monetary reform, land reform tends to provide a solid basis for economic liberalism. In contrast to 20th century collectivism and planned economy. Haven't looked at him, but he sounds like he's quite similar to Henry George by the looks of it. But haven't done that. Like for the point of view of the book, we'll be doing like the market socialists, the ones that actually existed, and like most of the other stuff. A lot of these other things are the same critiques apply.
And the market socialists, the calculation debate will definitely be including all the main fundamentals.
Yeah. So there's more than just there's the kind of theoretical market socialists appear in the calculation debates. So Lange and these types. Mundo Tazo, the Benjamin Peters book talks about that Soviet history, not so much the technical aspects, but it follows the actors in their cybernetic theorizing. Okay, interesting. That's probably
that's interesting.
What book is that, Benjamin Peters? If anybody knows in the chat, what's the name of that book? Let's see here. Anything else? That seems to be all the questions. yeah, so that's kind of it. We are really kind of loving it, to be honest with you. Like the book has, like, the last 6 months we have really been doing a kind of a deeper dive into the kind of, inspired by like what Donald's doing for his day job, the Toyota production system and all this stuff. So we've been doing quite a lot of extra stuff that we didn't think we would have had been doing. But we don't really envisage anything. You never know what's going to happen, but we don't really envisage anything else coming. We are kind of reticent to say how long it'll take us to write the third section, because I really personally I've don't know. What do you think? I don't know. I don't even know how we'll go about it, to be honest, yet. So
I would say, just to alleviate people's fears a little bit, like, we have written an enormous amount of stuff. We have a huge amount of notes, but as you know, it's a different matter to take that and form it into really tight, comprehensive arguments.
Particularly as, probably because we've been writing so much critique and foundation stuff for so long, that a lot of the contribution stuff that we have written was probably from before 12 months ago. That's fair, I'd say, Donal, isn't it?
Yep.
Not all.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, not all. I mean, but a lot, yeah.
A lot, yeah. So it'll be interesting going back to it now after coming out. And we know what we think in our heads, but seeing what is actually we have written and how we start throwing it together. But like, so we're kind of unsure of how it will go. I would think there is 6 months writing in section 3. Like, to put into perspective, I think we have written, we'll soon have written like over about, I think we're probably getting to, let me check. I'll actually check it here, and we can actually let people know exactly how many pages and stuff that we have written so far. It might be interesting. So we had a book writing schedule that had us finishing writing the book about 2 years ago. So that's good.
This is a planning book. Just
yeah. Yeah. So let me see. Where the fuck is this thing? Okay, give me a second here. Say something, Donal. Say something smart while I'm looking at this.
Oh,
Mr. Chance.
High time to end the stream. Yeah.
Okay. Let me see here now. No, can't find it yet. Give me a second. I don't know. Am I being dumb here?
Well, look, the point is, I don't know what it would be, north of probably 300 pages or something.
Yeah, I think it is about 3. I would think so.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. So it's going to be a big, like, by the time we have this done, I don't know, 400 pages or more. So it's just to give people a kind of rough idea. It's pretty big, I would say.
Oh, I have it here. Okay, so let's have a look here. So the first section all the way, so including all those chapters, that should be about 275 pages. We've also written a chapter on the GIC already, which we haven't included there because we're probably going to put the GIC stuff into this contribution chapter. We probably won't call it contribution. We'll probably call it something else in the end. But so we probably have written, we've written about 300 pages already. So that'll put into context. And I would think we have at least 100 pages in this contribution element. So we're looking at 400 pages minimum. Probably that's including footnotes and stuff like that. So the book will probably be coming around 400 to 425 pages. These chapters could be very difficult to write. So it's, I would hate to say it. We have not yet got a publisher. We both wrote some stuff about trying to get a publisher about 2 months ago again, and then we kind of went on such a kind of a roundabout trip with some cybernetic stuff. We put it off for a while until we figured out where our heads were at. So when we finish the end of section 2, the critique, we will actually look for a publisher, because I think we're really on the final bit. Like, we've done, you see, the thing is with, like, so these 2 sections that we've written, like, there's been an incredible amount of reading to be done, an incredible amount of analysis and study to be done, that all that study and analysis, we feel now is in, like, it's kind of done. Do you feel like that, Donal?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah,
I feel like it's done. So we just have to do the writing. Whereas, some of these sections were very difficult to write. You would have to read books upon books upon books to try and write one chapter. You might read 10 books and have to do them in depth and really understand them. So so hopefully it won't be as long as others, but I would hate to put a date on it. But if the book was out for next Christmas, Donal, would you be happy?
It sounds so far away, but yeah, I suppose so. Just because, well, I mean, I don't know. Could it be earlier than that? I would hope so. As you say, I think it'll be like the summer before we're finishing writing. So then I don't know how long the process takes after that. But whatever it takes, it takes. I mean, we'll.
Like, that's the kind of, I've been saying to Donal, like, to kind of keep him going. I've been saying, like, Donal, it'll just take as long as it takes. And I don't mean that in a kind of a way like we're not fucked, but it's literally like if our understanding goes in a certain direction and we find problems or stuff that we have to figure out ourselves before it, that's just what we have to do. And but we feel as if it's very much close there. Now, we had somebody ask, are there any criticisms of the methods used in Donal's factory?
Oh, well, we don't go into specifics of my. So what I work on is the manufacturing execution system, what's called the MES, and that deals with the actual physical kind of production process. So all the labor time accounting, all that kind of stuff in the factory. There are lots of other kinds of stuff, sub-departments that deal with economic resource management. You may have heard of that kind of stuff. That's a little bit separate, dealing with money and different kinds of things, resources. So we don't talk specifically about my work in the sense of specifically my factory and what goes on, but we talk about all of the techniques, basically the implications of manufacturing execution systems for communist planning. So not in the book, but do I have criticisms of how the factory works? Yeah, definitely, absolutely. And of the social relations in the factory that are very often contradictory to the whole way. I didn't mean your factory specifically. Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. But even in my factory specifically, you see that all the time, where things are set up in a certain way, and it's textbook Toyota production system or one of its derivatives. We had used also something called 8D, which was developed by Ford, problem-solving technique based on very derivative of the Toyota system, based on teams and everyone is equal, except people have specific roles to it's very, very cybernetic and so on. And then all of it's overruled because some manager is able to take some kind of action that just destroys the whole thing. So that's really, and anyone working in these kind of things will have similar experiences. So I would say it's a huge problem because of the social relations of a capitalist system, where it's always in the manager's interests generally to try to overturn that, because they lose power, and what's the point to being a manager if you have these cybernetic systems where you're just essentially a cog in the system performing a function, but really no higher than anyone else and no more important than anyone else. So there's always these contradictions. I didn't get to read the last message, Tom. What was it? Sorry.
Okay.
Well, you're both probably right. They're analogous to, or the same as Marxist cybernetic methods. I wondered only if they were somehow problematic. Very much so is the answer. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a disconnect, between the practice and the theory. So the theory is really unanimous, really straightforward. There's very little theory against the TPS type of arguments for social relations. No one really says, "Oh no, that's wrong." But in the practice, it doesn't. Most of the time, it doesn't come through at all. So
we have one here from Nom de Nom, Annie Matt Vidal or Paul Adler. Do you know either of those names, Donal?
I do know Paul Adler.
Who's Paul Adler? He's an optometrist somewhere in London. It seems to come up for me. So
no, but he is the I think we cite him quite a few times. So he wrote some very influential stuff on the Toyota production system and its implications in the NUMI plant. If you remember
that is true. Yeah, we do. Yeah, literally just looked at him the other day. Just reread it. So we do have Paul Adler, and we've read this really great book. Well, I've only half read it. Donal has really studied it on like a kind of cybernetic analysis of the kind of systems theory analysis, to be precise, of the Toyota production system by a American engineering professor who, when I finish the book, I'll try and get him on the podcast. He seems like he's a bit of a weirdo. He quotes Hegel in it. So there's a good chance he'll come on the podcast and not try and send the CIA after us. Anything?
Because there's actually a good one just for people to...
Yes. So the book is called The Modern Theory of the Toyota Production System. And it's by a guy called Philip Marksbury. I'll put it in the chat. Okay, I'll put it in the chat there. So if anybody wants to read that, it's really quite interesting. It's quite technical in places, like it's kind of written like it's a load of kind of documents that he's put into a book, kind of work descriptions. But it is very interesting. Let's see. Matt Vidal was recommended to me the other day in relation to Adler, and I listened through his whole book, Management Divided, in like 3 days. It's all Marx and Toyota lean. So it's very interesting.
That's something we absolutely have to check out. So thanks very much. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, that sounds like a really interesting one. There's a big smile came across Donal's face there. Okay. Do we have anything else we want to go through before we wrap up, Donal?
I don't know, unless there's any other questions. That's the state of things, I think.
That's the state. Like, it's onwards and upwards. Like, the book is, it's like, we're working on it. I'm working on it all the time. It's really getting, it's going to be a banger. If it's half, I said before, if it's half as good as what we think about, or what we think it's going to be, it'll be a total banger. And hopefully, at the very least, the critique element we think it'll be so good of all the various schools that hopefully it will move stuff on, because some of these the state of the art in the socialist left when it comes to the planning stuff, from our point of view, we kind of think that most of the existing stuff is there's really, really basic problems with it, and hopefully this book will be a good heir to the GIC, and if it is, we'll be very, very happy with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we love you and leave you. I'll say thanks to everybody in the chat. So we had auxiliary statements, Jerker, Mundo Tazo, maybe, Mark Owen, from all the way from Pacific Standard Time, we've had Alex. Hi, Alex. John Watson, Jardal, and who else? Mason, Kerr, and also, let me see, we had somebody else. Nom de Nom. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody, for coming and listening to us rabbit on for a while. We are working our socks off trying to get this book done. When it'll be done, you'll never hear from us ever again. We regret the day we ever announced we'd do a book, and we're only been doing this now because we're forced into it by the social peer pressure. We'll see you for the next book update, this time 2026. Good luck.
Good luck.